They see the culture. We're a 28-year-old company. We've got a lot of long-term employees, a lot of tenure, and there's a lot of passion for what we do here. And we want people to come in and see it. It's really important. And when we get somebody in the building, they end up doing business with us. We have a really strong record in that regard because they really can see that everything that we're talking about really does exist in our facilities.
Do you think that the same strategy works for maybe agencies that are either smaller or are looking to win business from smaller accounts, say like local dentist office or the local utility? Does trying to get somebody into the office still work just as well?
I don't think so. I don't think they place the same level of importance on that type of either security or culture. I think for them, it's really more transactional. When you're talking about large issuers or large auto captives or large student lending, it's more of a relationship and there's more of a security and a culture thing to it. But, small transactions, not so much.
Yeah, I agree. For the most part, I agree because, what I would think of as a more naive buyer, someone who doesn't work with collection, they may not work with any other collection agencies, is much less inclined to care about the things that, say, a large bank would. They don't view regulation in the same way that a small technology business. They're happy to get the benefit of working with a company who also has large financial institutions as a client, but they're not nearly as concerned as those large financial institutions, which, by the way, means that the sales cycle is a lot shorter with that type of client too.
Yeah, that's true.
Speaking of the sales cycle, at what point do you normally see deals tend to break down? Whether it be with a small client or a large client, if it's different, and what advice would you give to agencies about how to avoid that? Maybe Chris, you can take this first one this time.
Well, it's a little hard for me to answer because we generally, let me put it this way: where there has been some breakage, it's generally been on the client side because of something that might be system related. We don't really see deals breaking down based on anything that we've done that we feel like we can avoid. We've had, there's been one or two where there was an acquisition or there was a system conversion that was much more difficult than they thought, and it was going to put the brakes on everything. But in each of those cases, the thing that we have done is we've just stayed patient and persistent, because we know that if they liked us enough that they were going to do business with us, that if we stick with them and work with them through the challenges, then we'll eventually do business with them. So it may not be on our timeline, but we'd rather wait and have that client at some point than just be frustrated and walk away. That's the one piece of advice I would give is just stick with them. Don't walk away, because there are things that happen that are completely out of our control. And, I think Joe and I probably are, we all have clients that are going through systems conversions. There's a lot of systems conversions going on in this industry right now, and there's nothing we can do about it. From an agency standpoint, there's nothing we can do about it. Just have to deal with it and work through it and be patient.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There are a lot of system conversions taking place, for sure. But I think deals also break down when you don't have the right alignment, and if you're not aligned with enough people within either the organization you're selling to, or the organization, or internally. and making sure that you really understand the requirements from that a client has in order for them to place business with you is incredibly important, and you need to be know every detail. Otherwise, you get deeper into it, and there may be some things that you're unaware of, or on their side that you haven't made them aware of, that are that can slow things down, or potentially potentially end the deal. So I think really trying to understand as much of that, all of the details up front, making sure that in our case, making sure that enough people on the client side are really aligned. Again, we do things differently than most traditional agencies, or we do some things differently. Our communication strategy is different. So we can't rely on an agency manager that we really like to call all the shots and just assume that person is is capable of making a decision for an entire organization, especially if it's a really big one. If it's a smaller business, then that's that may be possible. But for a larger business, we need executive buy-in, and really across many different departments.
We talked a little bit about it, and Joe, you mentioned sort of doing your homework in advance of making that first call. Curious if you could expand and talk about what kind of research an agency should be doing about a prospective client, before reaching out and having a conversation.
Really understanding the things that, really trying to understand the things that are important to your company. For example, if, it might be a really interesting brand that wants to work with you, but the requirements could be, incredibly burdensome, and the amount of business that they have to place may not be worth may not be worth the investment. So really understanding the size of the opportunity, understanding something Chris said that I thought made a lot of sense it makes a lot of sense, which is, if you're good at something, you should be talking about it, but really you don't want to pretend to be good at something, because ultimately you're going to waste a lot of people's time on the client side and yourself. So if it's a type of business that you really are may not be have a track record in, you need to be upfront about that, and I think so doing as much due diligence as possible, and it also comes back to to establishing relationships within organizations so they can give you that pertinent information. And I'm not talking about, hey, like if you price it this way or this way, you're going to win, but really understanding all the details of what they have, what they could potentially place with you, what the decision-making process is. All of those things are really important as you get into a sale process, so that you're armed with as many answers, or you can go find the answers that are going to help you make a decision, whether you want to invest in that relationship or potentially not.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think Joe answered that question really well, and I think my advice would be know the prospect, know their industry, know what their issues are, know what their hot buttons are. Joe made a great point. If you are not already an expert at their specific industry or their vertical, do not pretend to be one. If you're trying to break into that vertical, that's perfectly fine. We've done that. We've entered a number of verticals in the last 8 or 9 years that historically the company didn't have any real experience in. But we went into it saying, listen, this is not something we have a lot of experience in, but let us tell you why we think we would be good at this. And that type of candor gets you a lot of opportunity. You don't always win the deal, and you don't always get to advance, but you at least get the opportunity to have a discussion. I think it's really important to know you really need to know what is important to that client. You need to know what they manage their business to. Is it compliance? Is it performance? Is it quality? Knowing those things helps you advance your conversation.
How do you learn that? It sort of seems a little circular, like, where a job won't hire you unless you've got experience, but you can't get experience unless you get a job. How do you know what a client's potential hot button issue is, sort of going in without really having that conversation first to find out what that hot button issue is?
That's a good question. I would have asked that if I were you too, Mike.
Thank you.
The easy answer to that is that we all work in this industry. We all know each other. We all network together at conferences, and we all talk to each other. So do your research. There's a lot of information on the internet, but also knowing other salespeople or other marketing people, other people at other agencies, just share information. You may have some information that's important to them, and vice versa. And if you network well and you have a lot of contacts, and again, I'll go back to Misty. She's got contacts everywhere in this industry, and she's helped people with information, and they help her. And that type of homework goes a long way. Knowing a little bit about who you're talking to, sometimes you do have to have a conversation cold. But if you have some information, a little bit about their history, you can advance the conversation a lot quicker that way.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah, it is.
Joe, wondering, I think Chris's point is excellent about sort of knowing and using the industry to sort of pick up intelligence. But my question is, how does an agency stand out from one another when marketing their prospective clients? Is it just sort of focusing on what makes your agency different from other agencies? How do you sort of approach that conversation, or that part of the conversation?
Well, I think for TrueAccord, it's a little bit different. Not 100%, but it's definitely different in that we use machine learning and a digital strategy to optimize the collection process. And make probably over 95% less phone calls than somebody else who would be managing the same number of accounts. And people know who we are at this point because we have a lot of large clients, and we've been fortunate to grow really fast. And again, I don't mean that to sound self-serving, but from my perspective, people don't come to me people will come to us looking to learn, and they will come to us looking to how do people work with us, no matter what the size of the client is. And that doesn't mean we don't have an aggressive outbound sales effort. We do. And just because somebody's interested and knocking on your door doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to give you business. But we've just established ourselves as approaching the collections process differently than other large agencies. And so one thing I think is, like I said, we have people coming inbound and looking to either one end of the spectrum is looking to understand how we do what we do. The other end of the spectrum is they call us and say, hey, we'd love to find a way to work together. Those are fantastic phone calls. I think Chris probably has a better answer for the industry at large on how you differentiate. So I'll throw it to you, Chris, to see how you what your thoughts are.
Sure. Well, one thing I think really stands out is high turnover of sales staff. That's one bad way to differentiate yourself. If you have consistency as an organization, if you have consistency in your sales staff, that sends a really positive message, because if somebody works at a company for a long time in a sales role, it immediately tells a prospect that, one, this person works, they must work for a good company, they must like it, and two, clearly they're productive and successful because they're still there. And that means that they're selling things and the clients are retained and you have happy clients. So I think that's one important way to stand out. And I say that, sort of flippantly, but there's a lot of turnover, and there's a lot of people in this industry that every other year I run into them and get a different business card. And that says a lot, whether it, unfortunately, the reality is it does say a lot. The other thing that we focus on, a couple areas where we really focus. We're constantly innovating. We do things differently. We have a slightly different focus from TrueAccord in that we come from the traditional call center based collection industry, but we are innovative in other ways, in omni-channel between email and text and chat, and we've got a virtual collection agent that we're building with AI and voice recognition. So we're doing a lot of things differently too, and telling that story and telling of all the advances that we're making in that as we speak to prospective customers is important. And that shows that we're an innovative and different type of organization. If your salespeople are telling the same canned story over and over again, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And the other thing we focus on is just overall involvement in the industry. We're very involved. We've got our chief risk and security officer is part of the Consumer Relations Consortium. We're members of ACA. We're members of RMA. I'm on the Experian Executive Collections Council. We try to really participate in places in the industry that make a difference and where we can share best practices, because I really do believe this industry is one where a rising tide raises all boats. I think we all have to help each other, because we're to some extent we're always sort of under attack, and I think it's good if we all work together. So our message is, it's always one of passion and innovation and involvement. We feel like we need to be a really important part of the industry and be a good example, and that's how we differentiate ourselves, is just the level of involvement that you'll find from various people at MRS across different areas of the industry.
Great answer, and bonus points for using one of my favorite quotes in a rising tide lifts all boats. Circling back to you, Chris, let me ask you, we've talked about sort of going after big clients. We've talked about going after small clients. Is there an ideal mix that a collection agency should be looking at, or any thoughts on how an agency should structure its sales efforts in terms of the types of clients it's going after?
I think that depends on, the size and level of maturity of the agency. So if you're relatively, if you're a new or younger agency, maybe you're building your infrastructure with smaller clients, but at some point, I think you have to decide where you want to put your effort. So we're getting bigger and bigger, and it's harder for us to service very small clients today, because sometimes a small client is extremely high maintenance and requires a lot of attention, and we just can't provide that based on the amount of business that they provide. So I think you have to be, we've spent a lot of time thinking about it and being a little bit more disciplined, and we've parted ways as friends with some clients and said, listen, we're probably not the right servicer for you anymore, and I think if you do it right, you can have those conversations. So I think that's kind of a hard question, Mike, because it really does depend on your size and your growth rate and, just where you spend your time and effort.
But I guess maybe maybe a better question to ask, or a better way to ask it is, should an agency just sort of throw its net as wide as it can, or should it have a targeted or systematic or deliberate approach in how it's identifying and going after its prospects?
That's a double-edged sword, because if you throw your net too wide, you may find it full of some fish that there's no way you can pull on board the boat, and then you're
Right.
wasting a lot of time and brain damage, and you're not getting any business. If you have never done financial services work, trying to land Cap One or Citibank as your first is about as foolish a thing as you could possibly do, because you're just not going to be set up to deal with their security and requirements. So, I think you have to be intentional about what you're going after, and you have to be reasonably realistic about what you can service and what it takes to get you to the next level.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, you also have to, when you balance large clients and small clients, and by the way, that means different things for different agencies. But you do have to be very thoughtful about it, because large clients take it's a different investment profile. I mean, you really have to, as Chris was alluding to, you need security and all types of infrastructure that you may not need for a smaller client. But at the same time, smaller clients need to smaller clients need to yield in a way that a large smaller client, they can't take up as much time as a big client. And so you have to have a strategy and an understanding of what that means and the balance, because if you have small clients that eat up as much time as large clients, then you will not be allocating your resources appropriately. But again, I think it just means different things for different agencies. The one thing that's consistent is that you need to be thoughtful about it and really have tough conversations. And if a client doesn't make sense for you to either continue working with, or a client doesn't make sense for you to bring on, then be thoughtful and try to make a decision as fast in the process as possible.
Good advice. Joe, have you noticed any changes in the conversations that you've been having with prospects during the past year in terms of the content of the conversations, or are you having more or less? Any trends that you've noticed?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I think I sense more optimism in the industry. I mean, I do think that people are concerned about a recession, and nobody's excited for a recession. I have heard that consistently, and I have no way of knowing, when or if that would potentially happen. But I think people feel better about where we are today versus where we have been in the past. When the CFPB got started, there was a lot of there was a lot of people who were scared and thought that they would try to put the industry out of business or put people out of business. And, there's certainly been some hardship, but I think, you adapt and people have gotten stronger. Now, there seems to be consensus that a rule will be coming out soon. So that'll be interesting. But if passes prologue, whatever is in that rule will hopefully provide a lot of guidance for people and allow them to make changes accordingly. But generally speaking, I think people are optimistic and really think that the industry is in a position to excel. So we're really excited about where things are going.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot less concern about the regulatory environment today. Not to say